Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. Good morning everyone, or whatever time it is wherever you're at. Welcome to yet another day of Innistrad Crimson Vow spoiler season. Now we saw a lot of exciting things yesterday, including yet another broken green mythic, and yeah, this card took about 2 seconds to figure out exactly how to completely break it in half. But yesterday I also took a break from the brand new spoilers to talk about which of these two pre-con commanders is better. And again, that's completely my opinion, so please, if I don't pick the one that you like more, well, I'm sorry. And speaking of liking a card, well, yesterday I saw what has got to be my favorite new card from this set so far with Horrifying Dollhouse. I just really like the design of this card, and I definitely have a spot for it in one of my favorite decks. And speaking of liking the design of a card, on this episode I'm going to be talking about Bloodvial Purveyor. And yeah, the title actually is pretty fitting of this one, and my apologies for the very bad impersonation. I want to give you blood. Actually, for me, that wasn't a half-bad, cartoon Dracula voice. Regardless, why in the world are we giving players blood? Well, let's jump into it to find out. So, Bloodvial Purveyor is a 5/6 vampire with Flample, which again is flying and trample, that costs 2 black. He has, whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player creates a blood token. And again, blood tokens are artifacts that have pay 1, tap, discard a card, sacrifice this artifact, draw a card. So, kind of like a clue that costs less to activate, but it lets you rummage instead of draw. Regardless, Bloodvial Purveyor has, whenever it attacks, it gets +1/+0 for each blood token defending player controls. Now, a couple of things before we really jump into this card and why I find it so interesting. This is more so the type of card that might make an impact in Standard. Again, I don't play Standard. I actually did back on the time of Desecration Demon, and this kind of has that feel. Again, exact same mana cost and a big flyer with a kind of downside but upside-ish. Regardless, obviously this is not a channel about Standard, or it would be called the Standard Quarters then, which isn't a bad name, I guess, but I prefer Commander's Quarters, okay? Now, Bloodvial Purveyor is not the kind of card that's going to see play in a ton of EDH decks. I mean, it's more of a niche-type card. That being said, I really like the design of this card, and actually, I really wish Wizards would design more cards like this, and, to be honest, more commanders that are like this. What I especially like about this card is that this is not a May. If an opponent casts a spell, they have to create a blood token. I really don't like when Wizards puts May on certain effects that gives opponents an option. Like on Quain, it doesn't require opponents to draw, which, could be used and abused to force them to draw out their deck. But instead, it's just more made so in a more friendly way where opponents actually have the option so they can decline to do a certain thing. That being said, Bloodvial Purveyor does not give them the option, so if they do cast a spell, they must make a blood token. Now, obviously, they can utilize their mana to sacrifice those tokens and discard cards to draw cards to get rid of those blood tokens, but if they don't, well, Bloodvial Purveyor can hit them for a good amount. Now again, all that does not make this creature worth actually playing in a lot of EDH decks, because again, you're giving your opponents basically rummage effects and, potentially hitting them for a good amount of damage if they don't rummage. But again, that's not why I'm bringing this card up though. I like seeing forced effects like this that you can use and abuse, and I really want to see some on some commanders coming up. Hopefully in the near future, I would really like to see some. So let me give you an example of one of my favorite commanders that does something somewhat similar to this. And again, you might initially think, well, this could never be good or never be used in a way that actually benefits you. Well, then you may have never met my good friend Feldegriff. Feldergriff is actually one of my earliest personal decks, and yeah, I just really like the design of this card. Actually, and I should say, for the most part. Feldergriff is a very old card, so I'm going to read its Oracle text. It is a 4/4 legendary creature Feldergriff that costs 1 green, white, blue. By paying a white, Feldergriff gains flying until end of turn, target opponent gains 2 life. By paying a blue, you return Feldergriff to its owner's hand, and target opponent may draw a card. And by paying a green, Feldergriff gains trample until end of turn, target opponent creates a 1/1 green hippo creature token. Basically, every single time you activate something from Feldergriff, an opponent is getting a benefit, or again, let's say a perceived benefit. Again, I did say that I, for the most part, like the design of this commander. There's only one thing I would change. I would probably take out, again, that may. Target opponent may draw a card. How about just target opponent draws a card? Not giving the opponents the option is obviously more beneficial to us. Now, at first glance, you might not think much of this commander because giving your opponents free things, well, usually isn't a good thing. But actually, there's plenty of ways to use and abuse, especially that green ability to give your opponents hippo tokens. Since that isn't a may, they must make those hippo tokens, and then you can utilize those tokens to actually benefit yourself. Now with this type of a commander, you obviously start with a more political tactic, like, hey, I'll give you tokens if you do this for me. And then at the end, you just maybe take those tokens and, take out your opponents with those tokens. Regardless, I really like this kind of design space where you're giving your opponents some forced perceived value. And then you utilize those things that you gave them for your benefit. Now, there aren't really too many things that force your opponents to make tokens. I mean, there's a couple actually that do creature tokens with things like Genesis Chamber, A Crow and Horse, and Hunted Horror. And there are different ways to use and abuse things like these, but again, those are for very specific decks. And that's okay. Having a very specific deck built around this type of thing, yeah, can be quite enjoyable. Again, just like a Feldergriff deck that is looking to give out a ton of hippos. Now, I know it definitely wouldn't make sense for the actual set, but I personally would love if Bloodvial Purveyor, was basically a 5-color commander that forced opponents to make blood tokens whenever they cast spells. Because there's actually a lot of fun interactions and different kinds of things that you can do that might be pretty unexpected. And those are the types of commanders that really aren't all that linear and really force you to think outside of the box. In all honesty, I really think that this kind of design space would be explored more often because I find it incredibly interesting. I mean, for example, you could utilize a card like Viridian Revel, which sees basically no play in Commander. It's an enchantment for 1 green green. It says whenever an artifact is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, you may draw a card. Again, by giving your opponents all those blood tokens, again, they get a slight benefit when they sacrifice them by rummaging, but you get an even bigger benefit by drawing a card every single time they do so. And of course, if they aren't willing to sacrifice those artifacts, well, there's plenty of ways to mass destroy artifacts like, Vandal Blast. So you can also use that in combination with cards like Magnetic Mine and Disciple of Vault. Magnetic Mine says whenever their artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Magnetic Mine deals 2 damage to that artifact's controller. Again, by forcing opponents to get a ton of artifacts, well, they're kind of now on the hook to get damaged a lot if they ever sacrifice them or if they ever get destroyed. And then Disciple of Vault says whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may have target opponent lose 1 life. So with this one, you can even incentivize other opponents to actually sacrifice their blood tokens and say, hey, if you do that, I will drain other player who's in the lead. And on the other hand, if your opponents don't sacrifice their blood tokens, well, you can utilize something like Ancient Runes. Its Oracle text reads, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, Ancient Runes deals damage to that player equal to the number of artifacts they control. So yeah, if your opponents aren't utilizing their mana to actually sacrifice those blood tokens, or again, if you've got other reasons for them not to, they're still going to be taking a lot of damage. Now, some other ways to benefit from our opponents actually sacrificing their blood tokens would be things like Waste Not, Underworld Dreams, and Psychic Possession. Waste Not says, whenever an opponent discards a creature card, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, add black to your mana pool. And whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. So when our opponents do rummage with those blood tokens, we are getting a big benefit. And then Underworld Dreams says, whenever an opponent draws a card, Underworld Dreams deals 1 damage to that player. So if we either don't want our opponents to sacrifice their blood tokens, or at least make them pay to do so, well, now there's some extra punishment for doing that. Or again, we can get an additional benefit with something like Psychic Possession. It says enchant opponent, skip your draw step. Whenever enchanted opponent draws a card, you may draw a card. And yes, I could have brought the new card Wedding Ring here, but that one's actually only during their turn if they draw a card, so that would be a bit too specific, and yeah, Psychic Possession would work better in that situation. But you could also just, not allow them to sacrifice their blood tokens if you didn't want them to. So you could utilize things like Collector Oof, Stony Silence, or, if you want to spend over $100 or so, Null Rod. Each of these basically say activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. So essentially we'd be forcing them to keep those blood tokens on the board, and yeah, that could build up pretty quickly. And then we could utilize cards like Dockside Extortionist. Again, actually that one's pretty expensive as well. Not nearly as expensive as Null Rod, but pretty high up there. Curious Herd and Hum of the Radix. Actually, I just looked up Dockside. It's at $54 right now. My goodness. Regardless, when it enters the battlefield, you create X treasure tokens or X the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. So again, by forcing them to make blood tokens and not allowing them to sacrifice them, that's going to build up quite a bit, and we're going to get a ton of treasure tokens with Dockside. And then Curious Herd says choose target opponent, you create X33 beast creature tokens or X the number of artifacts that player controls. So yeah, we can get a massive army of beasts out of nowhere. And then Hum of the Radix can be quite brutal, especially against certain decks. It says each artifact spell costs 1 more to play for each artifact its controller controls. So again, even just trying to play, say, just a Soul Ring is basically going to be impossible at a certain point for that opponent, because they're going to have to pay 1 for every single one of their blood tokens, plus all their other, artifacts as well. Yeah, that could be pretty brutal. Now, when it comes to actual commanders that might want Bloodvial Purveyor in their decks, for commanders that actually want to give out those blood tokens, well, you'd probably be looking for a group hug kind of strategy, and definitely a 5-color one with something like Kenrith Return King, or, maybe Corona False God. I mean, there are, group hug decks built around each of those. Regardless, again, it takes a specific kind of deck that actually wants to give out things like those blood counters to do so. But when it comes to actually, again, building around this card, this is just a thought experiment, because again, well, number 1, this is not a legendary creature, and number 2, it's not 5 colors. And again, unless you're willing to build an entire deck around kind of utilizing this as a secret commander in a 5-color deck, it's going to be tough to actually make this work. That being said, I do enjoy thought experiments like this, and again, I would really like Wizards to explore this kind of design space more often. Again, taking out that may, forcing opponents to actually make some blood tokens or clue tokens or whatever it is, force opponents to actually make certain things that you then utilize for your own gain. That kind of Feldergriff type commander that might seem very group huggy at first, but as the layers get peeled back, you realize that it's really the one that's controlling things. And those hippos that it's giving you aren't necessarily your hippo friends, it's Feldergriff's hippo friends. Now, will we ever see a 5-color commander that forces opponents to make blood tokens? Probably not. Would I like to see that? Absolutely. So Wizards, get on it. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.